Good evening and welcome to today's webinar, Championing a Diverse Workforce, a conversation with Meghan Welch, Senior Vice President, Head of Enterprise, Human Resources, and Chief Diversity Officer. This evening's webinar is part of Georgetown McDonough's Stanton Distinguished Leaders Series. The Stanton Distinguished Leaders Series brings to Georgetown University leaders who are renowned in their fields to share their unique experiences with students and alumni, and as well as to engage in dialogue about leadership in an ever-changing world. The series was made possible through the support of Georgetown parents Daniel and Mary Stanton, and we are grateful to them for their dedication to Georgetown McDonough. My name is Bryce Badger. I'm a current marketing major and member of the class of 2021 at Georgetown. I also serve as president of the Georgetown Aspiring Minority Business Leaders and Entrepreneurs and a senior coordinator with the Business Undergraduates Investment in Leadership Development Program. The Build program serves students from all backgrounds and offers them a foundation for success as they transition to college. I would like to introduce tonight's speaker and proud Georgetown alumna, Meghan Welch. Meghan serves as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Capital One. In this role, Meghan leads Capital One's global efforts to ensure a culture which values respect for every associate, is inclusive of diverse views, and where every voice is heard and matters. A Capital One associate since 1998, Meghan has held many leadership roles in Capital One's HR organization. She holds a bachelor's in science from Georgetown University and a master's in business administration from the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. She is an active alumna, holding officer and committee roles in both schools' alumni organizations. Welcome, Meghan. Today's webinar is moderated by Senior Associate Dean of the Undergraduate Program, Patricia Grant. Dean Grant is a graduate of Cornell University and the University of Pennsylvania. Dean Grant is a career educator who has dedicated her life to research, teaching, and service in K-12 education. The combination of her academic and professional experiences has enabled her to develop a proven approach that assists all students, particularly those who are Black and Latino, in achieving at the highest level so they might personally benefit and mentor future generations for the public and private good. Dr. Grant provides thought leadership around diversity strategy, organizational change, student leadership, educational policy, student retention, and organizational development. Dean Grant certainly serves as the co-chair of Georgetown McDonough's Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Standing Committee. For more information on Meghan and Dean Grant, please see their complete bios found in tonight's program, which provided in today's earlier confirmation email. Before we get started with tonight's important discussion, I'd like to share a few important webinar tips and reminders. This webinar broadcast is being recorded, and the recording of this webinar will be made available on the Georgetown McDonough YouTube channel soon after today's broadcast. Our panelists will take a few questions towards the end of today's program, and thank you to those of you who have already submitted your questions. But in the meantime, please do feel free to send your questions in as you have them throughout today's program using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And finally, if you're having any technical difficulties or other issues, please submit those concerns to our tech team via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to Dean Grant to begin this evening's discussion. Thank you, Dean Grant.
Thank you so much, Bryce. And thank you all for being here today for this very important conversation. We're very excited to get started and to engage in this dialogue. And as we get started, I want to just say thank you so much, Meghan, for being with us today. We're so delighted that you would take time to engage in this dialogue and to come back to at least the virtual hilltop. And so as we get started, I think it would be great to just hear a little bit about sort of the non-bio, right? And so we've heard about some of your amazing accomplishments, and we know that you've had quite an incredible career at Capital One so far. We'd love you to talk a little bit about your people management and human capital experiences, and to just talk about maybe what contributed to you being labeled as the one who drove the maker culture for innovation. It'd be great to just hear a little bit about your career arc and how you came to this work.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, Bryce, thank you for that introduction. Dean Grant, I am thrilled to be here. I'm privileged to be a part of this series. I am a proud Hoya. I'm reminded every day as I drink out of my Georgetown mug here in my virtual office about that. And so I'm thrilled to be invited and just thrilled to spend some time with you all here this evening. Well, I guess I could start at the beginning. I was raised in a small town in Western Massachusetts. When I say small town, I mean about 4,000 people. I had 64 people in my graduating class. So as you can imagine, while my world was vibrant and exciting at the time, it was quite small. And then my journey took me to Georgetown, where my certainly my world just opened up so much. Everything that the school has to offer, the city has to offer, and just really started to expand my worldview on what could be possible. And certainly enjoyed my time at Georgetown quite a bit. It flew by so quickly, so quickly. I wish I had known how to slow down time at the time. And then, pretty quickly found myself at the spot of needing to transition into the working world and, figure out what was next and how to support myself and stand on my own in the world. And, I wasn't one of those people who had sort of a predetermined career destiny, or, I didn't kind of wake up one day and decide I wanted to be an investment banker or a consultant or anything like that. And so I was just looking, for something that kind of felt right, something that, felt like I was qualified for, that would be exciting to me, but really not much beyond that in terms of specifics. And I wish I could say I had a more deliberate plan. I really didn't. And that is when I fell upon Capital One. And I recognize that was 22 years ago, and that is an incredibly long time to stay at any one company. It is very rare today. I am fully aware of that. But there was something about Capital One 22 years ago that is just still there for me today. And it wasn't anything that at the time I probably could have put words on, but there was just a feeling. There was a feeling about the values of the company, the obsession with doing the right thing, integrity and respect, and the mission of what the company was up to at the time that it just spoke to me. Again, not about a specific role or a specific job, but just, this is the kind of place that I want to be. And this is the kind of, culture that I want to help shape, and also to shape me and continue my growth journey. So, never, ever did I imagine that 22 years later, I would be, in this same spot. And that's something I think about all the time, and make sure that I'm, always challenging myself, and, that I'm comfortable with a very, very long career at a single company. And, every time I think about that, Capital One just continues to kind of check all the boxes for me. And in a lot of ways, Bryce described what I do today. So I've had a very long career, and always in HR, always focused on people and culture and diversity and inclusion, and helping others succeed. That's been something that I've been so passionate about for so long. And today I lead our enterprise HR team, which, if you think about that, it's all of the products and the programs and everything that we do to support our customers, who are the 50,000 employees of Capital One, to help them be great and achieve their goals, and support their families, and everything that we do in support of our employees. And I also serve as Capital One's Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Officer. And that's what we call it: diversity, inclusion, belonging. It's a mouthful, but each one of those words is really important. And I mentioned earlier that I probably couldn't have put a word to the feeling that I had when I first started working at Capital One. But I think that feeling was belonging. I think I did feel like it was a place where, I could be myself. I could, bring my full self to work, and really be who I was, and that I would be accepted for that. And so, when you talk about an arc, the fact that, coming back to this point, I get to focus on something like belonging all the time, and really trying to create that experience for everyone who chooses to join this company. I just consider it a real privilege. So, that brings me to where I am today in terms of focusing on diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
We're going to have a very rich conversation about all of that, the arc that you're starting to unfold for us. And I'm curious if you can reflect a little bit on the Business Roundtable and their reliance and focus on stakeholder value. What do you think the role of corporations is in creating value, perhaps using diversity, inclusion, and belonging as it is at Capital One? What do you think the role of corporations is?
Yes, this is such a rich question, and I think it's evolved so much. I mean, for so many years, I can remember being at Georgetown in econ studying, Milton Friedman and the shareholder theory, and that the role of a corporation was to maximize returns to shareholders. And that was the sole goal of a corporation. And then it was the shareholders, decision to, decide what kind of social impact they wanted to have with those returns. And, I think for many years, many corporations operated that way. And what I love over the last, decade or so is this shift towards corporations really being responsible and accountable for driving change, having social, having impact in society. And, you referenced the Business Roundtable last year, ultimately coming out with a very, an updated declaration. It was just August of 2019, which seems like it was so long ago in this COVID year. I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. But just about a year ago to really declare that, companies have many, many stakeholders, and it is a company's responsibility to balance all of those, right? Employees, customers, communities, shareholders as well. And that, it is not about optimizing for any one of those. It's about, creating greater good by balancing, all of those things at the same time. So I really feel like expectations for companies have changed dramatically. We see it in our own consumer behavior. I'm sure all of you, share this, right? You don't want to buy a product from a company that you don't think is a good company doing good for the world, right? You don't want to advocate for those kinds of companies. So, the expectations, I think, are just in a really different place today. And frankly, for the good. Corporations, corporate America is incredibly powerful. We have a ton of resources behind us, and we absolutely should, have that kind of impact and positive change in in the world. You mentioned diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and equity as an example of that. Absolutely. This is not just about, how are we bringing in talent to support our own business? It's about how are we, growing pools of talent? How are we helping more and more, young students have access to education and resources, and leveling the playing field as it comes to that access? There's so much that we can do, and we do in investing in so many different programs, in the community aimed at workforce development. That's a huge area of focus for us. And I think corporations can make the difference. I think corporations can drive change in these really important times. Also just when we look at what's been going on in 2020, 2020 has been quite a year for so many reasons. And, not the least of which is the senseless killings of, individuals, Black individuals like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And not that unfortunately, those tragedies are not new, but the reckoning that came with that, and the allyship that came with that. And so much of that is turning to corporate America to say, what are you doing about this, right? It's not just looking at the sort of conventional institutions to sort of drive change and laws, et cetera. It really is about, how can companies drive and have an impact in these areas. So, I think the name of the game has certainly changed, and that's one of the reasons why I'm proud to be a part of the company that has always considered that to be a part of our mission and part of what we do.
You mentioned change, and I think we should go there and just sort of talk a little bit more about how change is driven at Capital One, in this current moment of multiple pandemics. As folks talk about it, the shifts in the world economically, and in terms of just how we even work, right? What role do you think Capital One needs to play in creating that next normal?
Yes. Gosh, I never would have imagined that we would still be sitting here engaging in a series like this virtually, when this sort of all really started back, in the early part of the year. At the same, and it has been absolutely tragic what has gone on in our country, and the lives that have been lost, and the lives that have been altered due to COVID. But I do always look for COVID silver linings. I mentioned that as we were starting our call here today. And, I think that in some ways COVID has been sort of a great unifier. We are all sort of fighting the same virus, right? We're sort of all in it for the same cause. And I think that has really unified so many people. But at the same time, each one of us is experiencing different challenges. We know that COVID has impacted our Black and Brown communities in this country more than our white communities, right? How do we acknowledge that? How do we stare at that reality? How do we support, how do we support everyone through this, through this challenge? We know that virtual, right, working virtually, attending school virtually, all of that is extremely challenging for very different reasons, almost, unique to your individual circumstances. And so for me, one of the things that I've taken away from this is the value of empathy, right? And not just assuming because we're all in COVID times that we're all experiencing this in the same way. And how do we really reach across, understand, slow down, first of all, slow down to stop and understand, how is this experience impacting you and what challenges are you having? And how can I relate to that? Or how is that very different from what I'm experiencing? And how can we connect on a human level? And so while it's been sort of unifying in the sense that we're all, pointed in the same direction, kind of fighting the same kind of thing, the experience that each of us is having is quite different. And I've just seen overwhelming empathy among, my colleagues and in terms of how we're interacting with each other. And I think we can take that empathy and that understanding and that engagement, into a new normal at an even greater level. The second thing I would say is, we're all like really kind of forced into this, virtual setting, but technology in some ways also, I think, is helping to level the playing field. Access, things like this, right? Limiting some of the barriers to, to reaching out, to engaging. It's not about, who you happen to know or who you happen to run into or, whose office you drop into at work or at school, right? And kind of getting that sort of that level of access or, increased access. It really is all about, kind of unifying and leveling this playing field. We're all in the same situation. We all have the same size little screen on our, on our checkerboard here. And one of the things that we've seen at Capital One that's been so interesting is that one of the things we measure in the diversity and inclusion space is we have an inclusion index that we measure, much like an engagement index or, morale, those kinds of things. And we've actually seen our inclusion numbers at all-time highs. And I believe that it has something to do with this way that we're all working and we all have the exact same, tools at our disposal and access. So I do think that taking this technology into the future and using forums like this to provide, just much wider and broader reach to people who are interested in engaging, I think that's probably a second thing that I would call out. But first and foremost, it is that empathy. And I think we've all become a little bit more human this year. A little bit more understanding, and a little bit more willing to engage across different experiences.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think as we're talking about technology and data, and change in the beginning there, if we sort of connect all of those and add the ability to innovate, and as some people talk about pivoting from the pandemic, what are some of the things that you think Capital One is uniquely positioned to do because of those core competencies?
Around in the diversity and inclusion space? Yes. Let's see, I think, if I think about who Capital One is at its core, way back to its founding, Capital One's mission is about changing banking for good and really giving everyone access to building credit, to building financial stability, to believing there was a better way to do that, to give even more people the option to build towards their dreams. And so when I think about the core kind of DNA of who we are, that sense of inclusion for all is just sort of woven throughout who we are as a company and our business. And so that always gives me just such a great position of strength to start from in terms of this being so core to our mission and our company. The other thing that's really core to our company is data. So, Capital One was a big data company before that was a thing. That is what the data and analytics are what enabled us to really, to achieve that mission that I described. And data is a really, really important part of a D&I journey. For too long, I think data has been hidden or not shared transparently. And, we all know that what we measure is what matters, and that's where action happens. So, the first step, we've been on a data transparency journey as it relates to diversity, inclusion, and belonging for a long time. And we continue to push ourselves on how can we be more transparent? How can we share more about what's happening, about both what we're proud of, but also where we know we have areas for improvement. We are not alone in that. Every corporation in America has areas for improvement as it relates to representation of people of color, particularly in executive roles and leadership roles and management roles. So it's okay to share that. It doesn't mean that we're not committed. it doesn't mean that we're not, trying and working hard and constantly, looking for new ways to drive change. So I would say that data is probably the second thing that's, really core to Capital One and also core to this, to this journey. Putting that data out publicly, we've done that for a number of years, and we continue to disclose more and put more layers of our story out there. So I think that is a huge enabler, and really it allows us to compare how we're doing versus, other companies, to see who's doing incredibly well and go figure out what they're doing. I find in the diversity space, the sharing is tremendous. The willingness to share and, not hold anything, too close to the vest. If it's working for one company, it might work for another company. So that would be another one. I do get asked often, what's like the breakthrough innovation in this space? And, I wish I could say there was one thing that was just going to crack the nut. I mean, they're really, I haven't found a single thing, but I do think what's so important is this comes down to individuals, and individuals thriving and feeling like they belong and feeling that they can be successful and feeling that they don't have to cover anything every minute of the day, right? Not just outside of work, but at work. And that experience looks and feels different for everybody. But when you think about a company, I think about a company the size of Capital One with 50,000 employees, that relationship that an individual has with their manager, with their leader, with their executives, right? That's where this difference is made, right? That's what causes someone to want to join a company or stay at a company and build a career and advocate for other talent to come to that company. So, we do look regularly for innovations, and we're always trying out new technologies that can help us get underneath what's going on and get access to new talent and help us understand who's thriving and why, and how we can sort of bring that goodness to others as well. But at the end of the day, it is a unique and sort of individual battle that I think is fought every single day, in an individual's experience at a company.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think it's important to think about the power of individuality within a corporate space, and then also, how that individuality gets manifested through unique assets. I wonder how much of those values and realities you learned on the hilltop,
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of advice you might be able to offer to our attendees today regarding that.
Yeah. It's funny. As I was thinking about this talk, I started to think a lot about the hilltop time and those Jesuit values. And when we chatted the first time, you had those banners behind you, so it really started to get me thinking about those memories. And I think that value of kind of outreach, acceptance for all, that's just a really big part of. I think what originally drew me to Capital One and the mission that I described. I think it's what drives me to this work. Seeking, also sort of truth seeking and seeking out knowledge, and knowing and believing that knowledge is power, and when we know better, we do better, and really putting that to action. So I feel like I very much felt when I came to Georgetown that it was home. And I also say that about Capital One. And I think it really is that sort of acceptance and the diversity, right? The acceptance of diversity and really celebration of diversity that, that I took with me from Georgetown. Again, coming from a very small town experience into what you all know and love about Georgetown, and then taking that into my career and really, driving towards creating that culture where that acceptance was standard and was just a way of operating. So I would say that was probably the biggest one that rings true for me.
So think about both homes, if you will, for just a moment, and maybe you can talk about how agility has played into your ability to really think about your own leadership philosophy and how that has evolved.
Yes. And gosh, what a year for talking about agility. This is one of those for sure. But when I think about agility, I am a big believer in a growth mindset. I do believe we have the capacity to grow and change and evolve, regardless of whether we're students of life, students at a university. And I believe that of those around me and my team as well. And so, when I think about learning agility, it's how are we always How am I personally always, reading and listening to podcasts have been a huge addition to my life. I can, get other stuff done while I'm listening, taking in little nuggets of wisdom, almost every single day. So how am I constantly just soaking in? I do think in this world, it's been a little bit more challenging, because when I think about my day to day, I, walk into the building or the campus of Capital One, and there's so much going on. There's speakers, and there's all sorts of opportunities to just soak and learn all the time and sponge. Same thing when you walk across the campus of Georgetown, right? There's groups, there's discussions, there's advocacy, right? You're kind of constantly learning about things. And, in this environment, we have to really seek that out, right? It doesn't just kind of come into our world. We have to seek it out and seek out those connections. So I would say growth mindset, being a continuous learner, really possibility thinking, always challenging myself to say, what if? Opposite thinking, right? Or applying a really different construct to something and seeing, what could be possible? What happens when you do that? When you think about something really crazy or think about something kind of off the wall. The other thing that I think about a lot, and is also a really big value at Capital One, is the wisdom of the crowd, right? So how am I seeking out perspectives all the time? I often find myself, if I ever think I personally have the very best answer to something, I probably haven't worked hard enough, and I probably haven't asked enough people, because that's where I think the richness of really that truth seeking comes. And sometimes I also find that asking, I get even more sort of unique insights asking people who don't know anything about a topic what they think about that topic than asking people who have, worked in that area for a long time, because I just think the perspectives are really unique and different, and quite different. So, those are some of the things I think about. We have to be always learning, and really the pace of technology now requires that. There's no resting. The expectations of consumers, the expectations of learners, the expectations of, that we all have in every aspect of our lives requires us to really kind of keep on the edge and keep up.
Already started to go into what will be my final question before we start taking the questions that are coming in. And that's around your go-to leadership practice. In a time where every day can sort of look like the one before, how do you keep motivated, and what's your go-to practice?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot. I've been working a lot on focus lately. There are only so many hours in the day, and especially in this virtual world, that can really creep. I found myself getting online way earlier, staying online way later, just not being able to kind of separate. And I think that's really important. And so I challenge myself a lot to think about, what is it that I'm focused on? And is that something that I uniquely bring value to and I uniquely should be focused on? If not, it's probably an opportunity that I'm taking away from one of my teammates, right? What happens if I challenge, do I really need to work on this right now? Or do I really need to be the one making this decision? Or can I empower someone else to do it? And maybe that's a new or different experience for my team. At the end of the day, as a leader, the most important thing I can do is lead my team and help them be great. And if I'm cluttering up my time with a whole bunch of other things, I'm not focused on that. I'm not focused on giving them the right opportunities, and I'm probably not focused on coaching them as much as I can, and really, viewing my role as a coach. So focus has been a huge area of focus for me of late. And so I have a couple of routines. Every morning, my first meeting on Monday morning, I meet with my team of people who keep me organized and keep me on task. And we just align. We align on what is most important this week. Like, what are the things that have to get done? What do we need to do it? Who needs context? How can we really make sure that we're working on the most important things? And then I do like a little mini tune-up on that every morning, just 15 minutes. I just sort of reflect a little bit on, did I work on the most important stuff yesterday? Did I make progress? Did I move the really big balls forward? If not, what do I need to do differently today? And then I kind of set my course for the day. It's hard, sometimes you just want to jump right into it, or your first meeting is at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And that's when you want, when you're tempted to start your day. But I've found if I carve out just a few minutes to sort of take a breath, center myself, and think about what is most important today, then, I end up being much more productive, give all the right people the right opportunities, and have a bigger impact. So focus has been my, my big goal this year.
That's a really great one. Thank you for that. I won't make a bad joke about 2020. Okay. So there's some really great questions that have come in. And the first I'd like to ask is around what Capital One is doing to educate its employees, especially leadership, around how they appear in the world and individual intercultural competence, for instance.
Yes, yes, excellent question. So, we've had a training agenda for many, many years. We do training on unconscious bias and all sorts of different frameworks and models for how to, how to be an inclusive leader and how to build culture. But I will say, with what has gone on in 2020, it really gave us reason to pause and stare hard at that agenda and think deeply about whether we were really hitting at the core of the topics that really help, transformation from the inside out. And what we realized is we were not really offering curricula on systemic racism in the US and where those constructs come from and what is the history and what does that mean today? And not in a way of judgment or shame, but in a way of, like I said before, knowing, right? Knowing so I can, so I as a leader can do something about it. So, while we've been invested and had a very thorough and robust training agenda for a long time, that was the piece that really felt missing. And so we are working right now actually to implement that training for all of the executives of Capital One. It will be a really significant undertaking, and we'll be launching that before the end of the year. So I'm really excited. I think it's a different way to tackle this than we probably have in the past, and that perhaps many corporations have as well.
So your answer to this next question may in fact be what you just shared, but what are some of the most innovative programs you've seen in corporate DEI? As a consultant, we've seen so many VPs of DEI hired, but the company doesn't know where to start. Where are you seeing traction and where are you seeing innovation?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll tackle the where to start point first, and I'm sure lots of people on the call would have thoughts on this, but it has to start at the top. This has to be a core value of the company. The leadership team, the executive team of the company has to be behind this, and I think that is the way. There's lots of change that can be driven at different levels in the organization, no doubt, but I think that is the way to just absolutely ensure success. As far as innovation, there are some interesting technologies that are, there's no shortage of technology that is kind of exploding in this space. And I think, a lot of times we look at traditional metrics like representation or hiring or retention, right? Kind of the end result metric. And there's some really interesting technologies right now that are starting to give, for example, in the recruiting process, much more insight into what is going on throughout that entire recruiting process. Right? Who is attracted to your company? Who is getting those initial looks? Who are getting interviewed? And what is happening through that process? And I think that's another example of like really digging and using that technology platform, using that data to then really dig in and say, what is going on here? Right? Again, that power of data. Right? Without that, you cannot get the insights and you cannot drive action. So I think the technology that is really starting to come up in a big way in this space, I think we're going to see some pretty interesting offerings here, yet to come, and a few that are on the market right now.
Excellent. Can you speak to how Capital One is leveraging equity to create a sense of belonging with employees and clients?
Yes, leveraging equity. Can you say a little bit more, any more detail on that question, or?
That one came in.
Okay. Leveraging equity creates a sense of belonging. Okay. Well, I can talk a little bit about, how we think about belonging. And, for a long time, this work was called diversity, and then it was called diversity and inclusion, and now it's diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And, maybe at some point we'll add a fourth word on there. I think it'll get a little bit of a mouthful at some point, but, yes, it is important to have a diverse workforce at a company. If you think about, for example, at Capital One, we have about, 65 million customers, 65, 70 million customers. We have to represent those customers. We're making incredibly important decisions in an industry like financial services. And if we don't understand and the experience of our customers and reflect our customers, right, there's no way we can make the very best decisions for them. So, diversity is incredibly important. Inclusion, do you have the right people around the table? Do you have, are you pulling the right voices in? As your decision making, are you staring at who is around this table, but more importantly, who is not around this table, and how do we bring everybody together? But that belonging is about when I'm at that table or when I'm in that meeting, do I feel that I can be myself? I can say what I'm really thinking, or am I constantly having this sort of, other layer of thinking of, can I really say that? What are they going to think about me? If my idea is not accepted, is it because it wasn't a good idea, or is it because of the color of my skin or my sexual orientation or my gender, right? And so, just to be able to shed all of that and be, truly authentic and frankly be celebrated for that. That's where the magic happens, right? That's where greatness comes from. That's where the very best decisions are made. That's where innovation happens. We know that time and time again, studies have proved that diverse teams are more innovative. And it's not just about putting a bunch of people with different backgrounds together. It's about doing that in a way that everybody feels like they're heard and they are valued. And so, that's really why we're continuing to push our journey much more into the belonging space.
Yeah, and you're starting to talk about this next question a little bit here too. Just the question is, we have a lot of students who are interested in not being average leaders, but principled leaders. And there's an emphasis on principled. And so what behaviors would you encourage students to engage in, and what might they make sure to avoid in terms of managing others?
Yeah, so I love that. Going back to principles, I think that is such a powerful way to lead a team. If you're clear about what it is that you stand for and what you care about, everybody knows, and there's no, unpredictability in your decision making or in your leadership philosophies. And then people can choose, is this a leader that I can align with? Are their principles aligned with mine? And then I think greatness can really come from that. One bit of advice that I would have is, as many of you will, soon or, in the next couple of years set off and, figure out what's next in life. And, I think many of you will choose to work for large companies or, a company like Capital One or so many options that are out there. And, when I graduated, I was looking for a job. I needed a job, and it was a little bit about, something that I find interesting and, a paycheck, right? And a way to sort of get myself started in the world. But a company and a decision around a company is so much more than a job. Companies, I do believe, have hearts and souls and can change the world. And so, as enticing as it is to make a decision about like, this job sounds really interesting, or, this offer is really generous, like really challenge yourself to look at the principles and the values of that company. Because if you want to be a great leader, working at a company that is congruent with who you are and what you care about, right, that's when you can unleash your own sort of principled leadership. If you feel like there's constantly a push and pull between maybe the values of the company and what you value, it's going to be really hard to authentically lead in that company and to be yourself. I love, there's a quote by a poet named Lucille Clifton who says, in the bigger scheme of the universe is not just asking us to do something, the universe is asking us to be something. And I think a great company gives you a platform to be something. I think about the opportunities that I've had as a part of Capital One, serving on boards, advocating for causes that I believe in, working with nonprofits with sort of the power and the resources of a company like Capital One behind me, right? That really helps me live those principles and put those principles in action. So that would be my advice is pick an organization that feels authentic and true to your principles and who you are. Don't be afraid to share those and speak those and be open about those. And people who are aligned to your principles will follow. And I think that's a great way to not only develop followership, but to build leaders, to continue to build leaders in your footsteps as well.
Wow, and this next question is right on the tails of where you left off, which is to really talk about how you leverage diverse talent across levels at Capital One. And it references the frozen middle, where managers of underrepresented backgrounds get stuck, as if you will, at middle management and may struggle to advance. What sort of strategies and approaches to use to ensure that doesn't happen?
Yes, that is such a great question. One thing that we're really focused on, and I am personally really focused on right now, is going to figure out, find those people, right? Who are they? And we can use data to do this, right? Who's been in a job for quite some time? Who's been at a particular level for quite some time, and why, right? And then going to ask the question, right? Asking it in a supportive way. What are your goals? What are you interested in? Tell me about how you're feeling about how things are going here, and what can I do to help? And really, I think that's where advocacy and sponsorship comes in and plays a really big role. How do you connect with those individuals and say, I would like to help you. Like, if you can tell me what your goals are, let's work together to achieve those and to shine a light on the great work that you're doing. But I think at first it starts with, you have to go, like, I believe in a data-driven way, go figure out who those people are, where are they sitting in your organization, particularly in very, very large organizations. People can get lost. And using your workforce data, go figure out who is getting lost and ask them the question. Because chances are, nobody is asking them that question. What are your goals? How can I help connect you to that goal? Someone is not asking that question, and or those individuals are not feeling comfortable advocating for themselves because potentially they don't feel like they will be heard or respected or valued or like they belong. So that would be my advice: is you have to seek it out. It also goes back to my one individual at a time, one connection at a time. And really understanding what is going on for a person as an individual. So we call it discovering talent, to really go in and figure out what is happening and why might someone be stagnant, and does that have to be the case?
That's great. Can you talk a little bit more about the inclusion index? You referenced that earlier, and this next question is wondering how that is measured and what elements maybe have led to your excitement about the results so far.
Yeah, we've taken a couple of different cracks at this. We have a number of questions. I think right now it's 4 questions. Questions like, I believe my voice, but my voice is heard and matters, right? So it's a self-reported questions that kind of come together to form an index. And we've evolved it a bit, and I'm not sure that anybody's quite nailed this one. I think there are a lot of different ways to look at it, but we're continuing to evolve, continuing to analyze it. And, the numbers tend to be pretty consistent, but I go and look at the tails. So if there are really low numbers in a place, like, what is going on there? What experience, of course we break it down in a lot of different ways, but what is happening in that experience that is causing, those low numbers? And then also I love to look at the really high numbers as well. What's happening there that can be emulated elsewhere in the company? So like I said, it's a composite of a couple of different questions that form, an index. It's something we're continuing to study and always sort of testing new questions to see if maybe we can get underneath that feeling of inclusion and ultimately that feeling of belonging, in an even better way. But I do think, it has helped us to figure out where there's some pockets of real, perhaps challenges, and then where there's some pockets of real success, and what's going on there. Who's leading those teams, and what are they doing to really drive an inclusive culture?
And this next question does follow on pretty nicely as well, just to sort of talk about, how you go about maybe embedding DEI in the organization. What if there's someone who doesn't quite exhibit that they value DEI, or in Capital One's case, diversity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you deal with someone who maybe is in leadership in that way?
Yep. I mean, that certainly happens in large companies, right? Not everybody is, sort of demonstrating the exact leadership behaviors that would align to our culture. One of the nice things about Capital One, we use a very thorough 360-degree feedback process. And so feedback can come from any direction, and we can do that both anonymously as well as, with certainly identifiers attached. So, we do encourage a lot of feedback, but very specifically, we also do a people manager survey. So we very directly survey the direct reports of people managers to see how those, see how those associates are experiencing their life at Capital One and their engagement with their manager in particular. And those results get reported to the manager's manager. So we try to put feedback mechanisms in place where people, if they're not having a great experience, can speak up, can share those experiences. Lots of skip levels, right? Lots of inquiry about how things are going. And then, of course, if someone isn't really aligned with the leadership model of Capital One, that's a discussion that we will have, together with them and see if there's room for improvement, or if perhaps Capital One isn't the right place. Not every company is the right place for everyone, but we do put a big premium on feedback as a strong and powerful mechanism to reveal where there might be challenges.
There's a lot that's been written about biases entering into the data and algorithms in particular. And so how does Capital One approach and maybe even audit those formulas and algorithms to make sure that those biases are remediated, first discovered and then remediated?
Yeah, this is certainly I think a growing challenge, and in the last couple of years has made a lot of headlines. So we try not to rely too heavily on algorithms where we don't know sort of what the underlying, how the machine has been trained, because we recognize that this is a risk. And I think there's a lot of advancement to be had in this space. That said, even absent some of the machine learning and some of the technologies that are coming up, there's so much that data can tell us about what to go do, and then we can go do it. So I don't think it's certainly restrictive as we wait for technology to catch up and continue to work with our teams, our data scientist teams, to advance the technology ourselves as well. So for right now, I would say it's definitely something to watch out for, to not overly rely on any one predictive model, because there could be some bias creeping into that system as well. So awareness is certainly the first. I think the awareness and caution are certainly the first steps in that journey.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about this earlier as you were talking about the journey that Capital One is on to look at potential structural issues and policies or activities that might not really mesh with the culture that you've established and are continuing to evolve. What are some of those barriers those structural barriers that you're trying to address, you are even encountering at this early stage?
Yeah, so a couple of things as it relates to the commitments that we've made, sort of the new commitments here in 2020. We absolutely know we need to drive diverse representation into leadership, and specifically for Black and Latinx executives. That requires more work, right? The talent is there. We just have to go find it, right? We have to position ourselves in a way that talent is interested in coming to Capital One. It requires more patience on the slates, and when we're recruiting, to say, no, I will not make an offer until I have seen a diverse slate of candidates. I will ensure that my interview panel is diverse as well. And so I think sometimes patience or lack of patience can get in the way, right? A lot of times there's an opening and you need that filled quickly. So how do we really get way out ahead of those needs and ensure that we're being incredibly patient and working really hard to make sure that we have the most diverse slate, and that in the end, the most qualified talent wins and moves forward in that process, but that we had a diverse pool that we were selecting from. So I think human behavior around patience and commitment is, one of those challenges that we've seen. We're also constantly reviewing our talent systems for any evidence of unconscious bias or bias that might be in those systems. I think a great example of this is pay equity. We've done a ton of work on pay and ensuring equitable pay outcomes for everyone. And one of the things that we realized is that, lots of times if we find that there are inequities in pay, it really has nothing to do with what's gone on as someone's been at our company, but it has a lot to do with the offer someone got when they were coming in the door. And a very common way to make an offer is you ask someone what they're making at their current company, and then you give them a nice bump over that to entice them to come over, and they join your company. And so you can see how it's, how pay is always built on, sort of what I made at my last company. So where does that, if there's a wrong going on there, like how and where does that ever get righted? And so an example, one of the things that we've done is as we were going down our pay journey, we realized that, there's only so much we can do kind of inside Capital One, but it's really that offer point that makes all, such a huge difference. And so, that was an example of a barrier that we came upon. And so what we decided to do is we no longer ask our candidates, what they're making, we look at what people who are in that job, doing that job at the company make, and we form the offer based on that. So that's another example of kind of how do you really think about this differently, and how do you sort of change that construct or change that barrier, that structure that's been, in play for, for so long. And, that then is a greater good for the world too, right? Because that person will, hopefully do great things at Capital One, and then maybe go on to some other company and have a fair, sort of fair pay to take into that new role as well. So, that's just another example, is how do we really look at systems and question them and really think about what if and what could be going on here. The last thing I'd say is that, as we look at things like, structural bias and, systemic racism in our country, in our communities and companies, it's really, I think it's really easy to get defensive about that and say, well, that's not who we are, or that's not our intention. But to really be able to pick yourself, pick up and look at it from a different level and say, but these are sort of system and group level dynamics that have existed for a long, long time in our country, for the history of our country, right? It doesn't mean that you are a bad person or a company has bad practices. But what's great is how do you find out about those things? How do you challenge them? And how do you make sure that you're flushing any of that out? So I would say that's another barrier, is trying to separate this intent from what might actually be happening, and be willing to kind of rise above that and challenge that structure and drive change.
To that point, I wonder if you can talk about the opportunities that you're most excited to tackle in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space at Capital One.
Yeah, there's so many. I mentioned the training earlier, the executive education on systemic racism and some of the underpinnings. I'm really excited about that. I think that's not something that is offered in schools, right? That's not something that a lot of people in America have had access to. And I think that can be eye-opening. So I'm pretty excited about that, for sure. We're also continuing to expand our investments in HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions. And we have some great partnerships going there, with a plan to continue to increase those and deepen those relationships even more. So I'm very excited about that. We're also spending a lot of time looking at our talent brand. So who are we? Who is Capital One as an employer to different demographic groups, to college grads, to professionals, to executives, of sort of all different backgrounds. Who are we, and how do we get underneath that and really understand that, and what's working and what's not working, and how do we really bring our true sort of authentic kind of values and mission to bear in that conversation. So lots of work around talent brand. I think that's something that's really exciting, and a lot of innovation in that space, certainly, about how do you reach potential talent. I think there's a lot of cool developments coming there through technology as well. So those are some of the things I'm really excited about, but lots of work ahead of us for sure.
So just two more questions here. One is, how do you foster an open, communicative environment for your employees? And you did reference something earlier that may fit here too.
Yeah. I can tell you one thing that I've been doing quite a bit this year with my team for the last couple of years is, I realize I try to be really, really mindful and notice who is not putting their voice in the room. If we're debating a topic, who have I not heard from? And then I know lots of times people don't want to be put on the spot, say, Dean Grant, we haven't heard from you yet. What do you have to say on this topic, right? Maybe the answer is just you don't have anything to say right now. And so it's not about putting people on the spot, but I've been trying to experiment with different ways to ask questions to make people feel comfortable, saying what's on their mind. So like one example of that is I will often ask, if we're debating an idea and, talking about the pros and cons, I might ask, what would our harshest critics say about this idea? And then it's like, well, it's not me saying this, but like someone could say that we're not thinking about X, or we're taking our eye off the ball on Y, and just trying to ask questions in different ways that bring out different perspectives. So, that's, I think, one small example of something I try to do within my team. I try to, really play with what are the questions that I can ask that can bring out the different voices in the room. And I really feel like if all leaders are focused on, who's in this room and who's not here, who's speaking up and who's not, and how do I create the environment where the right people are here and speaking up and feel comfortable to do so, I think that goes a really long way in terms of someone feeling like they're valued.
Thank you. So this is the final question. How do you keep up with trends and determine relevance? Where do you look for that inspiration, perhaps?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. I mean, it's just, bombarded, way too much internet time for sure. Certainly connecting with colleagues. I belong to a couple of groups. Those things can take, roundtables and things can take a lot of time. And so I'm very discerning about the groups that I join and the kind of roundtables or conferences or things like that I attend, because you could make a full-time job of doing that all the time. And so, I want to ensure that they are spaces where people are willing to share, are willing to say the tough stuff, and where I feel like real solutioning is going on versus just kind of discussion. So I do belong to a few of those types of groups, but I try to be pretty discerning about that, because again, that could be just an endless journey of connecting in that way. I mentioned podcasts before. That's a big one for me. Bite-sized things, nuggets. The other thing that's fun is people know I listen at work, know I listen to podcasts, and I do lots of big group talks all the time. And so there's always a question of, what did you listen to today? And then, I get tons and tons of recommendations. And so just, lots of trying lots of different things out. So that's another big learning. And then, my team. I mean, my team is a wealth of knowledge. They're all connecting all the time. Just making the time and space to say, what are you hearing? What's on the horizon? What are other companies struggling with? What's in the news? How can we stay on the front foot on this stuff? And particularly in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging world, there's a lot of connecting right now. There are a lot of headlines. I mean, when I first started this work many years ago, there weren't diversity related headlines on the front pages of CNN, Washington Post, the New York Times, etc. And now there are. So the world is serving up a lot of content to react to. I would say that's the other thing is, and what do you do in the moment to support your employees, to support the people you care about, to support your loved ones when there's a barrage of things happening all the time. And companies play a role in that, unlike in the old days when that stuff stayed outside of work and this was just about work. And we know we have a responsibility to support our employees as well.
So I have to revise my earlier statement and ask you one final question.
Okay.
What's one podcast that you think that we need to start listening to tomorrow?
Okay. Well, gosh, I should have known that you would ask this. Let's see. I have two. They're pretty popular. They're not super obscure, but I love listening. I love the TED app, and I love listening to TED Talks. I just think they're bite-sized. They're always giving me like just a new perspective, a new spin on something, a new way to think about something. And even if the domain isn't something I'm particularly interested in, thinking about like, how does what I just heard apply to my domain, and kind of trying to put that topic matter into a different context, and what can I learn from that, and what can I come up with from that. But my favorite go-to every morning, I start my day with the Daily by the New York Times. It's always relevant. It's always interesting. It's always unique. And I think it's great reporting. So the Daily is my daily go-to.
Well, that's fantastic. I think we'll end there, Megan, and just thank you for joining us for this Stanton lecture. This has just been a tremendous opportunity and window into not only what Capital One is doing in diversity, inclusion, and belonging space, but the ways in which all of us can be inspired to embrace our Jesuit values and to think about what we can do to make a difference in the world, and in particular around diversity, inclusion, and belonging in our own journey here at Georgetown McDonough. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insights. And we very much appreciate having this opportunity to dialogue with you this evening and today. All the very best to you. And thank you all for joining us today for this amazing discussion. Take care.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you, Dean Grant, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.